So we'll start with your full name.
Okay. Hi, my name is Susan Lynn Henry.
Okay, and you go by Sue?
I do go by Sue.
Great.
Yeah. If I hear someone call me Susan, I think I'm in trouble.
Okay. And how do you identify?
I identify as a lesbian and left-handed. Back in the day, the community was still very closeted here. People were afraid. We did have several bars in town, but you also want to, find people who share your values in other things. And I just wanted to have an independent bookstore that was focused on gay and lesbian folks. We had books for African Americans. When we opened, we were very broad-based in alternative books. The bookstore was unique in Charlotte. Rising Red Books was unique. There was nothing like it. Our idea was you could come to the bookstore for information. And that may be partially because I'm a librarian, right? Information is important to people. There are newspapers like Q Notes.
That whole row is front page. See how yellow they are? Okay, this is the very first one ever in newsprint. Publications like Q Notes were vital for communication with the community. There were really some horrible things going on. Before I got involved in Q Notes a lot, I worked at a convenience store. And there was a regular police officer that came in all the time, and he used to tell stories how the police officer would change name badges and go to the brass rail, which was a gay bar, and beat up the tags. I had someone show up at my house with a baseball bat one day. Having a publication that, whether it's online or hard copy or what, that they can go to and read about their community is vital for people. It literally saves people's lives.
I met Jim through Q Notes when he took over publisher of Q Notes. I was on the board of Queen City Coordinators a couple of years before that, and we started Q Notes as a newsletter. And we called it Q Notes because of the QCQ for Queen City Coordinators, the name of the organization. Any and every kind of discrimination was blatant and obvious and forward, and there was no legal recourse for any of it. And so people could be fired.
The applicant says the Charlotte Police Department knew he was a homosexual from his Navy honorable discharge papers.
That would disqualify him because he is saying, I have engaged in an act that is a criminal act in the state of North Carolina.
You could be kicked out of your house if you were renting. You could be kicked out of your church. Certainly every day of the week people were kicked out of their families. So there was a lot at stake. I always say people weren't just in the closet, they were in the vault. Nobody was out at that time publicly, or almost nobody.
Don King was one of the first Charlotte gays to come out of the closet and remains one of the few who will appear on television in support of the cause.
You cannot overstate the importance of Don King on the beginnings of the gay and lesbian community in Charlotte.
The gay movement is political and social, it's not sexual.
Don King. Back in the day, Don King was the out gay man in Charlotte, and I was the out lesbian. Anything the Charlotte Observer wanted to know, they would either ask Don or me.
We hired Don King to actually do the editing and putting together the paper. Don was employed by the Charlotte Observer in the marketing and promotion department. He was very much out. He had a little bookstore himself years ago in the front room of his apartment.
King runs a bookstore called the Friends of Dorothy, a code word in the homosexual community.
Don, he started a lot of things and got a lot of things going. He was a phenomenal individual, did a lot for the community.
It's hard to imagine now the degree back then that gay and lesbian people simply were not spoken of at all. There was no mention. It's as if we didn't exist, and that's exactly what our opponents wanted. The other thing you felt was isolated. Is there anybody else out there?
Want to know about what it's like to be gay or lesbian in Charlotte? Call the Gay Lesbian Switchboard. They're in the phone book.
The Charlotte Gay and Lesbian Switchboard was terrific. And it was hugely secretive. They wouldn't even tell you where it was located originally. Oh yeah, people were that afraid. That was kind of crazy.
If someone could call up and just talk to somebody, if they were suicidal, they could get somebody to listen, and that was vital for the community back then.
They never saw your face, and you could use a fake name if you wanted, and they would answer the phone and like, hi, where's the bar? Hi, is there a newspaper? Hi, is there a church? Whatever.
QCQ was sort of an umbrella organization. It just grew and grew, and it oversaw the switchboard, the Speakers Bureau.
I was on the Gay Lesbian Speakers Bureau. There were 4 of us who made ourselves available primarily to college classes, but a civic group, a church group, anybody could request and we would go and speak. So we would kind of give opening discussion and kind of some facts and figures, background, introduce ourselves, show that we weren't, landing from Mars. We'd had one head. But most of those sessions turned into Q&A. And there was such a hunger for that. I heard very often, I know they're gay, but they won't talk about it. A dialogue across difference on sexual orientation was very, very helpful, but the gay people weren't yet prepared to have that. We didn't have the term ally back then.
The more people you know, the more you understand. So when someone comes out, or if you meet someone that's openly LGBTQ, you realize they're just like everybody else.
When I moved here, I was looking for a Pride event. I thought, well, surely a city of this size would have something. That's when I asked around. I found out the one event at UNC Charlotte had been done.
Charlotte's very first Pride was June of 1981, mainly at UNC Charlotte. There were speakers, a softball tournament.
There was a family picnic.
And Josh Burford, the historian, says around 100 people showed up.
Which is a lot of people for a word of mouth. I mean, again, University City might as well have been Florida because it was so far away from Uptown. And it also had a corporate sponsor, too. Budweiser was its corporate sponsor.
So in 1982, I got here. I found, what was a Pride event at that time in the parking lot of a bar. And I thought, gee, it seems like this should be more public. So we deliberately structured the event, although it was in a public space here in Park Road Park, it was not publicized outside the gay community. So within, newsletters or just postings that would be put up on bulletin boards in the bars, word of mouth, enough to a degree to get about 120 or so people to turn out the first year. The next year, we ran a quarter-page ad in the Charlotte Observer, not for the park event, because again, we were not publicizing that, but simply to acknowledge Gay Pride Week.
The newspaper ad was funded by a group of homosexual organizations in Charlotte that say they are concerned about the civil rights of their members.
And that was also a key next step. I don't think there had ever been paid advertising in local media for a gay organization.
The black community, too, suffers a lot of repression. But gay people are the last, as the ad says, the last socially acceptable people against whom it's okay to be bigoted. And we're trying to change that.
That little quarter-page ad did really well. So in 1984, we wanted to take it to the next level.
Hey, Jerry, it says here that this is Gay Lesbian Pride Week.
We went to 2 radio stations in town to purchase radio time.
Really? What are they up to?
We were told, sure, no problem, what you want, when do you want it?
They're trying to educate the rest of us about the kind of people they really are.
And then it got down to, what's it for? And we're like, well, it's for Gay Pride Week.
The answer, of course, was no. The reason being they felt it was too controversial a subject.
The young man is Darrell Logsdon. The group he represents is the Queen City Coordinators. Among the stations that the group approached were WSOC AM and FM.
I thought it was kind of childish, very simplistic, and really so silly.
Now, again, if they had said yes, we would have had to have said no thanks, because we had no budget at all whatsoever. But they didn't know that. So we went to the city to ask to buy ads on city buses.
Turned us down only when they found out that it was a gay lesbian group and that this was our slogan.
In fact, as Logsdon suspected, he was lied to. There was space available.
Why?
We prefer to have the transit system advertising, marketing for goods and services and not for controversial issues in the community.
And Lovelace says the new contract could well put down in writing provisions against controversial ads like this one.
And so that gave the first burst of publicity around the ad that was coming up a month later. So by the time the day came for the newspaper ad to run, it was already a story. Those events, while small by today's standards, I think they were significant just because they happened. After the event in 1984, that's when the AIDS crisis started to hit.
Al Rosen.
And so a lot of things, a lot of outlook shifted from work for advocacy to work for survival.
I stopped counting people at 25 that I knew that had died. And a lot of people have bigger numbers than that, but I just stopped counting. The March on Washington in 1987, it was just amazing. I had never been to a march of any kind, much less one that big. Hundreds of thousands of people there to support LGBTQ rights. And people screaming, what do you want? Gay rights. And that photograph that we used on the cover of Q Notes, I took that photograph. It was actually a panoramic of several shots pulled together. It was so empowering, so freeing, that you realize that there are lots of people like you, not just the handful that you know. And so it gave me the energy to keep going and keep Q Notes alive.
The AIDS crisis forced a lot more people out, and that helped start to build widespread community support. Also in the late 80s and early 90s, a couple of things that were happening. There's an organization nationally and locally called PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. We had two individuals running the Charlotte chapter of PFLAG at that time who were doing a phenomenal job, and they convinced the national organization to have their conference in Charlotte. There were speakers, there was a typical conference you would expect, but it was the first time something like that had been done for gay and lesbian people in Charlotte. And the chair of that committee was an individual named Dan Kirsch. You cannot talk about the development of the Charlotte lesbian and gay community without including Dan Kirsch. He was an extraordinary organizer. He knew how to put on an event. A lot of these things, the progression, they seem like really small steps, but they set the stage for the next logical step. North Carolina had had a statewide Pride event for some time, but it was usually based in the Triangle area, and in true Charlotte form, we wanted to show that, oh, we could do it better and we could make it bigger. So in 1992, a local organizing committee was formed here in Charlotte, probably about 12 of us, and I was on that committee, to make a bid to bring that state Pride event to Charlotte.
Dan Kirsch and I were the co-chairs.
We don't want problems to happen, and that's not what this is about.
Dan was a dear friend. I think we started organizing it probably a year and a half out. What I remember are meetings, meetings, meetings. Dan Kirsch is very thorough.
Gay March organizers predict Charlotte's Uptown Parade and rally in Marshall Park will be a lot different than Washington was.
The people coming from around North Carolina are more conservative by nature. That doesn't mean that it can't happen, but it means it's more unlikely to happen here.
The state pride was a huge success.
It's the biggest march in the state at the time, with about 5,000 people.
It was a great event. It couldn't have gone better. We had a good turnout of people along the sidewalk, and of course there were some protesters, but even in '94 they almost looked out of place. It almost looked as if this event belongs here.
It's just important to let the community know that we're normal people with good values.
We changed the whole concept of Pride. We had a dinner, educational workshops, church services, a rally, a dance, a parade. We had a weekend of Pride. So again, all those groups that had been growing and forming and becoming cohesive and trusting each other came together to make that Pride thing happen. Like a loaf of bread, it's got to rise. After the state Pride, then the next year was Out Charlotte that focused on culture. Dan Kirsch was a visionary here, and his love was theater. They went on for a number of years. The Gay and Lesbian Community Center came about not long after that. There was an actual physical community center, and I'm pretty sure that wouldn't have happened if Dan hadn't done Out Charlotte. Once we kind of got our feet under ourselves in the community, we realized that we could kind of be ourselves. There's a lot of humor in my community, right? Yeah. And so why not Better Homos and Garden Store?
Having the state Pride event and march in Charlotte '94 was really a turning point. It really set the stage for Charlotte having a true gay and lesbian community for the first time. What we would think of it today.
So between 2001 and 2013, you have the festival going on and continuing to go on and grow and grow. And then 2013, Charlotte Pride had their first parade.
And Charlotte Pride is actually gigantic.
We had 80,000 attendees. Last year, 275,000 people in attendance. It's a place to feel accepted. We are so lucky and so blessed to have all of our LGBTQ history stored at the King Henry Brockington Archive in UNC Charlotte.
It's a beautiful space and a lovely collection.
And it's got your name on it.
It does. Don King, his name is also in the collection.
How do you feel about that?
Originally, I felt overwhelmed. I might start to cry. I've said this to a couple people lately. When we did the bookstore and then all the stuff that came from that, basically, we were just doing something. We were just doing what we wanted to do. And I never really thought about it being a huge impact. I just didn't think about it like that.